Star Wars changed cinema forever, but the version George Lucas first assembled was, in his own words, an absolute disaster. Did you know the film was rescued in the edit by 3 editors, including Lucas's own wife, who won an Oscar for saving it? Or that another famous director wrote the opening crawl? 15 facts, starting with the movie that almost wasn't. 15. The first cut was so bad, Lucas nearly gave up. Here's the fact that reframes everything. George Lucas's original edit of Star Wars, assembled by editor John Jimson, was, in Lucas's own words, an absolute disaster. The opening space battle kept cutting away to Luke and his friends on Tatooine, killing the momentum. The pacing was dead. Lucas screened this rough cut for filmmaker friends, and nearly all of them thought it was terrible. Only Steven Spielberg believed it could be a hit. Lucas was devastated. His wife, editor Marcia Lucas, told him, "Yes, it's a mess, but there's a great film in there. It can be saved." So Lucas fired Jimson and handed the film to Marcia, along with Richard Chew and Paul Hirsch. They stripped out the exposition, cut the Tatooine detours, and re-edited so the pace was dictated by the cutting itself. The 3 of them won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. The movie you love was rescued in the editing room. 14. Another famous director wrote the opening crawl, that immortal opening crawl. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, wasn't written by George Lucas in its final form. At an early screening, Lucas showed a version with no crawl that dropped audiences into the story with 0 context. Director Brian De Palma, Lucas's friend, the man behind Carrie and Scarface, was in the room and told him bluntly he had no idea what was going on and needed a prologue. Lucas wrote 6 long paragraphs of dense exposition and showed them to De Palma, who responded in his own account, "George, you are out of your mind. It's gibberish and it goes on forever. Let me write it for you." De Palma then took Lucas's rambling text and, with writer Jay Cox, boiled it down to the tight, punchy crawl we know. One of cinema's most iconic pieces of text was largely written by the director of Scarface. 13. Luke Skywalker was originally named Luke Starkiller. The hero of the galaxy nearly had a much darker name. In early drafts and even into the beginning of filming, Luke Skywalker was called Luke Starkiller, a name drawn from Lucas's dense early mythology, The Journey of the Whills. The title of one draft was literally The Adventures of Luke Starkiller. Mark Hamill has confirmed he filmed scenes still using the Starkiller name before it was changed. The name was dropped fairly late, reportedly because Starkiller carried unpleasant, violent connotations that didn't suit a wholesome young farm boy hero, especially in the wake of real-world violence in the news. It was softened to the gentler, more heroic Skywalker, which obviously became one of the most famous surnames in fiction. It's strange to imagine rooting for Luke Starkiller, and the change proved wise. The name didn't vanish entirely, though. Decades later, the sequel trilogy resurrected Starkiller Base, a small nod to the hero's discarded original identity. 12. Every studio rejected it, including Disney. Before it became one of the most valuable properties on Earth, Star Wars was a pitch nobody wanted. George Lucas shopped his space opera concept around Hollywood and was turned down repeatedly. United Artists passed, Universal passed, and in an irony that has only grown more delicious with time, Disney, the company that would eventually buy the entire Star Wars franchise for over $4 billion in 2012, also rejected Lucas's pitch in the 1970s. Only 20th Century Fox took the gamble, largely thanks to executive Alan Ladd Jr., who believed in Lucas even as board members balked at the rising budget and bizarre screenplay. The rejections look absurd in hindsight, but at the time, a film full of made-up words, robots, and a laser sword-wielding space wizard seemed like a huge risk. Every studio that passed missed out on a revolution. and Disney had to pay billions decades later to finally own the film it once turned away. 11. Lucas traded his director's salary for the rights that made him a billionaire. Here's the business decision that changed Hollywood forever. When negotiating with 20th Century Fox, George Lucas made a fateful trade. He agreed to forgo an additional directing salary, reportedly giving up around $500,000, in exchange for keeping the film's sequel rights and, crucially, the merchandising rights. At the time, movie merchandising was considered nearly worthless. The studio happily handed those rights over, assuming they meant little. It became one of the most lucrative decisions in entertainment history. Star Wars merchandise, toys, games, lunchboxes, everything, went on to generate billions upon billions of dollars. And Lucas, not the studio, owned it. That single negotiation is the foundation of the entire Lucasfilm empire and George Lucas's personal fortune, ultimately enabling him to fund his own films and sell to Disney for over $4 billion. The studio kept the salary savings. Lucas kept the galaxy. It's the definitive lesson in knowing the true value of what you're negotiating for. 10. The Tunisia shoot was hit by a freak storm, the first in 50 years. The Tatooine desert scenes were shot in Tunisia, and the location shoot was, by all accounts, a miserable disaster. The production was plagued by problems, malfunctioning props, brutal heat, and equipment failures. But the crowning blow was meteorological. Tunisia was struck by its first major rainstorm in some 50 years, a freak downpour in the desert that flooded sets and threw the schedule into chaos. For a film depicting a bone-dry desert planet, being hit by a once-in-a-half-century storm was a cruel irony. The troubled Tunisia experience left Lucas exhausted and demoralized early in the shoot, and the difficulties only mounted from there. A British crew skeptical of the material, actors struggling with the strange dialogue, and a studio breathing down his neck. That the gleaming, iconic Tatooine footage emerged from such chaos is a minor miracle. The desert planet that launched a saga was born in mud, malfunction, and the wrong weather at the worst possible time. 9. The film's iconic villain voice belongs to an uncredited actor. Darth Vader is one of cinema's greatest villains, but he's a composite of at least two men, and the most important one went uncredited. The towering physical body belonged to bodybuilder David Prowse, who wore the suit and delivered the lines on set. But Prowse's strong West Country English accent didn't suit the character, so his dialogue was entirely redubbed in post-production by James Earl Jones, whose deep, resonant voice became inseparable from Vader. Yet Jones initially declined screen credit, considering his vocal contribution too minor to warrant it. He felt he'd just done some voice work. So in the original 1977 release, the most menacing voice in movie history appeared with no credited actor at all. The role was simply listed as Vader with Prowse. Jones would only take formal credit years later. Darth Vader, that singular icon of villainy, was quite literally two different performers, a body and a voice, stitched into one unforgettable presence. Quick hyperspace pause. If this deep dive is earning it, hit like and subscribe because we chart a classic every week. Now, back to a galaxy far, far away, starting with the actor who thought the whole thing was ridiculous. 8. Alec Guinness thought the dialogue was rubbish. But negotiated a fortune, Sir Alec Guinness lent the film immense credibility as Obi-Wan Kenobi. But the distinguished actor was privately unimpressed with the material. He famously found the dialogue clunky and the whole enterprise faintly ridiculous, reportedly calling the script fairy tale rubbish and struggling to take lines like "the Force" seriously. He accepted the role largely for the money and out of respect for Lucas. But Guinness made a shrewd deal that his disdain never undercut. He negotiated 2.25% of the film's gross profits. Given Star Wars' astronomical, unprecedented success, that small percentage earned him a genuine fortune. Reportedly, tens of millions of dollars over the years, likely more than any other single payment of his career. so the actor who thought the film was silly nonsense became fabulously wealthy from it. Guinness had mixed feelings about being forever associated with Star Wars over his celebrated dramatic work, but there's no arguing with the payout from his supposed fairy tale rubbish. 7. The Death Star briefing used one of film's earliest CGI shots. Star Wars is celebrated for its groundbreaking model and effects work, but it also contains a genuine, if tiny, piece of computer graphics history. During the Rebel briefing before the climactic assault, the rotating wireframe schematic of the Death Star, the graphic showing the trench run and the target, is early computer-generated imagery, one of the first uses of CGI in a feature film. In an era when virtually every effect was a physical model, miniature, or matte painting, that little rotating diagram was a glimpse of the digital future. It's a small but significant detail, especially given that George Lucas would go on to revolutionize computer-generated effects through his company Industrial Light and Magic in the decades that followed. That primitive rotating schematic is a seed of the entire CGI revolution that ILM would later lead. So hidden inside the most famously analog, model-driven blockbuster of the 1970s is one of cinema's tentative first steps into the computer-generated age that would eventually reshape it. 6. It's secretly a remake of a samurai film. Star Wars' deepest structural DNA comes from Japanese cinema. George Lucas has repeatedly cited Akira Kurosawa's 1958 samurai film The Hidden Fortress as a primary influence, and the parallels are direct. Kurosawa's film tells its story partly from the perspective of two bickering, low-status peasants, which Lucas transformed into the squabbling droids C-3PO and R2-D2, the audience's ground-level entry point. There's also a hidden princess, a grizzled warrior general protecting her, and a story of smuggling something precious across enemy territory. Lucas drew on Kurosawa's samurai and their code to help shape the Jedi and their honor-bound warrior philosophy. It's a profound example of cross-cultural inspiration. One of the most quintessentially American blockbusters ever made is built on the bones of a Japanese samurai epic. Lucas took Kurosawa's structure, themes, and character dynamics and reimagined them in space, proving that great stories transcend genre and culture. The Force, in a sense, flows partly from feudal Japan. 5. It began as a failed attempt to make Flash Gordon. Before Star Wars was Star Wars, George Lucas wanted to make something else entirely, a Flash Gordon movie. As a young filmmaker, Lucas was a devoted fan of the classic Flash Gordon serials and set out to acquire the film rights to adapt them. But he was unable to secure the rights. They were too expensive or unavailable. And so, undeterred, Lucas decided to create his own original space fantasy universe from scratch instead. That failure was one of the luckiest in film history. Freed from adapting an existing property, Lucas invented his own galaxy, mythology, and characters, resulting in something far larger and more original than any Flash Gordon adaptation could have been. 4. The cast thought they were making a flop. During production, almost no one involved believed they were making a masterpiece. Most of the cast and crew thought the film would be a disaster or, at best, a forgettable B-movie. Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and Carrie Fisher have all recounted how strange and unpromising the whole thing felt on set. The bizarre dialogue, the men in rubber suits, the actors delivering lines to robots and dogs in costumes. Ford, in particular, famously griped about the script's stilted language, the dispiriting shoot, the troubled Tunisia disaster, and the skeptical British crew all reinforced the sense that this weird little space movie was headed nowhere. Even Lucas, after his disastrous first cut, feared he'd made a flop. That the film became a world-conquering phenomenon shocked virtually everyone who made it. 3. Its sound was as revolutionary as its visuals. Star Wars didn't just look unlike anything before it. It sounded unlike anything before it, thanks to sound designer Ben Burtt. Rather than use electronic bleeps, Burtt built the film's entire sonic world from real, organic sources. The lightsaber's iconic hum came from combining the buzz of an old film projector's motor with the interference of a television picked up by a microphone. This organic approach gave Star Wars a tactile, lived-in reality that made its fantastical universe feel genuinely real. Burt essentially invented modern sound design in the process and won a special Academy Award for his work. The sounds became so iconic they're now instantly recognizable worldwide. The lightsaber hum, the blaster fire, R2's chatter. It's a crucial, often overlooked reason the film works. You don't just see this galaxy, you believe it, because you hear it. 2. John Williams' score revived the orchestral film soundtrack. In 1977, lush orchestral film scores were deeply out of fashion, considered old-fashioned relics of Hollywood's golden age. George Lucas initially even considered using existing classical recordings. Instead, on the advice of Steven Spielberg, he hired composer John Williams. And Williams responded with a sweeping, symphonic, leitmotif-driven score performed by the London Symphony Orchestra that single-handedly revived the grand orchestral film soundtrack. The main theme became one of the most recognizable pieces of music on the planet. Williams's score did something profound. It grounded the strange, futuristic space fantasy in familiar, emotional, romantic, musical language, making the alien feel mythic and timeless rather than cold and sci-fi. It won the Oscar and is routinely ranked the greatest film score ever composed. 1. The film that invented the modern blockbuster step back and Star Wars' true legacy is almost impossible to overstate. It fundamentally rewired the entire film industry. Before 1977, the biggest movies were often gritty, adult dramas. Star Wars, made for around $11 million against enormous studio skepticism, grossed hundreds of millions and proved that a spectacle-driven, effects-heavy, merchandise-fueled event film could dominate the culture. It essentially invented the modern summer blockbuster and the franchise model that rules Hollywood to this day. Its influence is total. It created the template for the effects revolution, the merchandising empire, the sequel and universe strategy, and the very idea of the movie as a cultural event. Its studio ILM would go on to define visual effects for generations. Those were 15 facts most fans have never heard about A New Hope. Which one got you? The disastrous first cut, or Disney rejecting the film it later bought for billions? Transmit your answer to the comments. If this earned it, hit like, subscribe, and send it to the friend who can quote the whole movie. Until next time, may the Force be with you.